האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov and good evening, everyone. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Vayishlach, and we're going to do Os Daled, section number 4. Before we begin this section, we're going to take a look at 3 psukim, but they do not come from our parsha. They actually come from the previous parsha of Parshas Vayetze, and the Zera Shimshon is going to focus on these, the meaning of one of these 3 psukim as the main theme of his discussion, of his drush in Os Dalet in section 4 on Parshas Vayishlach. So let's take a look. This is Bereshis Perek Chaf Tet, Psukim Chaf Ches, Psukim Chaf through Chaf Beis. Again, Bereshis Perek Chaf Ches, Psukim Chaf through Chaf Beis. Okay, the first part, this is talking about where the famous story of Yaakov Avinu leaving home, and he comes to the place, and he goes to sleep, and he dreams of a sulam, a ladder that is on the ground. It's stationed on the ground, but the top is going up to Shamayim, and Malachim are going up and down, are going down and up, I should say. Up and down is correct. And this is right after that. Here's what the Torah says: Vayidar Yaakov neder lemor, and Yaakov took a vow, saying, Im yeh Elokim imodi, if Hashem will be with me, Ushemorani baderech hazeh, and he will guard me on this path that I am taking, Asher anochi holech, that I am going on, V'nosan li lechem le'echol, uveged lilbosh, and he will give me bread to eat and clothes to wear. Vishavti visholem el beis avi, this is the next pasuk, and I will return to the house of my father in peace. V'hoya Hashem li lelokim, and Hashem will be for me a God. That relationship between Yaakov Avinu and Hashem will continue and flourish. If all those things happen, then here's the third and final pasuk we're going to read. V'ha'even hazos asher samti matzeva, and this stone that I have set up as a monument, yeh beis Elokim, it will be a house of God. V'chol asher titen li, and all that you give me, Yaakov says to Hashem, aser asrenu loch, I will certainly tithe it, give 1/10 of it to you. And it is those last 3 words, aser asrenu loch, I will certainly tithe it, or I will tithe. A tithe, I will tithe, loch, to you. Those are the 3 words that the Zera Shimshon is going to focus on. And let us get right into section Dalet. Midrash, the Medrash Yalkut in the Yalkut Shimoni says, Al ha-pasuk vayavek ish imo, on the pasuk that is in our parsha of Vayishlach, about a man wrestled with Yaakov. On that pasuk, the Yalkut Shimoni says, Lokach Yaakov is called Masar Miknehu. Yaakov took all of the Meiser of his flock, all of the animals that he had separated from Meiser from his flocks, Visholach biyad avodav, and he sent them in the hands of his messengers, V'nosan le'esav, and he gave these animals to Esav. Omar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Yaakov, Asisa sakodesh chol, you have, by doing this, you have made something holy and sacred into something mundane. You've used something that should have been designated, that should have been used only for a holy, sacred purpose, the Meiser, and you've given it to Esav as a gift. And so Hashem says you've lowered the sanctity of these animals. Omar Lefonov, so Yaakov said to Hashem, Ribono Shalom, the master of the world, Ani machanif la Rasha, I have to flatter this wicked person, Bishvil Shelo Yahargeni, in order that he should not kill me. Ad kan Lashono, until here is a quote from the Medrash Yalkut Shimoni. So the Zera Shimshon asked 2 questions. Kosher, Lama lo sholach mishelo, if Yaakov felt he had to send this gift to Esav, as of course he felt he needed to do that, why didn't he just send his own animals as opposed to animals that he had separated off as meiser, as a tithe, to be used for a sacred purpose, to be used as a gift, so to speak, to Hashem? And what kind of answer is it that Yaakov Avinu gives when Hashem says you've taken something sacred and you've used it for a mundane purpose? And Yaakov says, I had to give it to the Russia, to Esav, to save my life because he was, in order to convince him not to kill me. How does that really answer the question that Hashem asked him, when Hashem's whole point was, don't use the meiser animals. If you want to use your own animals to give a gift to Esav, that would have been fine. So the Zera Shimshon's two questions are really, clearly bound up together in the sense that they both express the fundamental question of why did Yaakov decide to give animals that he had separated for meiser, that he had tithed, that he had separated off from meiser. Why did he choose to give those animals specifically to Esav? So the Zera Shimshon continues on the bottom paragraph of this column. V'yesh, and we can say, from the beginning, this was Shel Yaakov. This was Yaakov Avinu's intention. Yaakov Avinu's intention from the beginning was to separate tithe, to tithe, take a tenth of his flock, separate meiser, and to give them to Esav, or as we'll see, something similar to giving them to Esav right now. Lazar is kol mamono shekana b'chutz la'aretz, to take meiser from all of the things that he had acquired in chutz la'aretz, lefi shehaya tachas chelek hasarim, because things in chutz la'aretz are under the control of the officials, of the officers, meaning Chazal teach us, Zera Shimshon here is referring to a teaching of Chazal, that each of the umos ha'olam, each of the nations of the world outside of Eretz Yisrael, have a divine sar. They have an angelic sar, I should say, an angelic officer, an angelic official that's appointed to control their affairs or to watch over them. And therefore, when Yaakov left Eretz Canaan and he went out to Lavan, so he knew he was living now in a very different place, in a very different type of location under very different rules. Because he was living in Chutz La'aretz, and he was living in a place where these angelic sarim, these angelic officers, had control over the areas. And it's appropriate to give to them a portion in order that they should not raise charges, they should not allege charges against Yaakov. So Yaakov Avinu's reasoning, according to the Zera Shimshon, was everything that I've acquired in Chutz La'aretz, I have to separate some of it and set it aside to give to these to the forces that are in control, that Hashem is giving control to over Chutz La'aretz, because they could make charges against me and they could create problems for me. And so in order to stop that from happening, I'm going to give them a chelik, I'm going to give them a portion of the things that I've acquired outside of Eretz Canaan. Goral echad l'Hashem, the goral echad l'Azazel, as is expressed, as Zera Shimshon says, in the Yom Kippur service, where we take 2 rams and we do a type of lottery, and one of the lots says that the ram that this lot falls on will go to Hashem as a korban, and the other lot says this ram will go la'azazel, meaning it will be taken to a place in the out in the wilderness, and it will be pushed off the mountainside there. And Uchemoshe Kosav Hashach, as the Sifsei Kohen Perush on Chumash writes, that idea was to appease, so to speak, the forces of Tuma, the forces of impurity in the world, so that they would not bring charges against Klal Yisrael on Yom Kippur. So Yaakov Avinu had a similar idea of appeasing the forces of Tumah that control matters in Chutz La'aretz, outside of the land of Israel, and to appease them by separating a type of meiser, a type of tithe, to give it to them. V'zehu hakefel, and this is the reason behind the double language, shel aser asrenu. I will take a tenth, and I will take a tenth. So the Zera Shimshon says, why did Yaakov Avinu use that lashon twice, a double language? Because he already from the beginning had in his mind that he would take meiser twice. He would take meiser once in order to designate it for the forces of Tumah, for the impure forces in control outside of the land of Israel. And he would take meiser a second time to give it to Hashem, the normal way that meiser is used, to use it for a sacred, for a kodesh purpose. So the one meiser would be for chol, would be for a mundane purpose, and one meiser would be for a kodesh, a holy sacred purpose. Mishum hachi, because of this, Baal HaTa'amim, the creator of the cantillation notes of the truck on the psukim, nischakem lehaniach tipcha tachas aser, very wisely or strategically, you might say, placed the note tipcha, which is kind of like a comma, kind of like an ending indication, or a pausing indication, tachas aser, under the word aser, the first of the two words in the phrase aser asrenu. If you look in the Torah and you look at the truck notes, you'll see that there is a tipcha under the aser, and the Zera Shimshon is saying the tipcha indicates a dividing point or a pausing point. Kedei lahafrid bein aser, in order to separate between the first aser, the first tithing, which was for a whole purpose, which was for a mundane purpose, as the Zera Shimshon has been discussing, because that was to go to the impure forces. Le'asrenu loch, and that had to be separated from the second phrase of asrenu loch, I will tithe it for you, shehu kodesh, which means it's being tithed for Hashem, for a sacred purpose. Shezeh niskayim, and this sacred purpose was fulfilled be'isur habonim, when Yaakov gave a tenth of his sons, meaning one out of the 12, dahainu Levi, which was Levi. Yaakov Avinu pledged that Levi would be given to serve Hashem in a unique and special way, Kidiisa b'Yalkut Sham, as it states in the Yalkut Shimoni over there, but that's really a parenthetical phrase. The main point is that when Yaakov Avinu from the beginning said in the psukim that we read at the start, Aser Asrenu Loch, Zera Shimshon says one of the meanings of the double use of the word tithe, Aser, is that Yaakov said, I'm going to take meiser twice. I'm going to take meiser once for a whole purpose, a mundane purpose, and because that's from the produce of outside of the things I acquired outside of Eretz Yisrael. And then he said, and I'm also going to take a real meiser, a real tenth of my produce to use for a sacred, for a kodesh purpose, as is the normal practice, and as Yaakov felt would be appropriate. V'lochata Yaakov, and this should not be considered a sin by Yaakov Avinu, meaning this taking of a meiser for a mundane purpose should not be viewed as a sin. Lefisha kavanoso hayakach mitchila, because this was his intention from the beginning, meaning that Yaakov never had the intention of separating meiser to use for a holy purpose, and then he changed his mind and said, okay, and decided now I'm going to give this to Esav, or now I'm going to use it for a whole purpose. That would be a chait, that would be a sin, but that's not what happened with Yaakov Avinu. Zera Shimshon is being emphatic here and emphasizing the fact that Yaakov Avinu from the beginning had in mind, I'm separating a meiser that shouldn't really be meiser in the kodesh sense. It's not going to have the holiness and the sacredness of Meiser, and I'm only separating it because this produce came to me, as the Zera Shimshon explained, in Chutz La'aretz, and he felt the need to appease the kochos hatuma, the powers of impurity that have some authority outside of Israel. Ve'im kol zeh, and even notwithstanding this, knowing that that was Yaakov's intention, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Amar Lo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu still said to him, Asisas HaKodesh Chol, you took something holy and you made it profane. Shelo haya lecha likroso b'shem meiser, because you shouldn't have called it meiser. It wasn't a mistake to take a tenth of your acquisitions from Chutz La'aretz and decide to give them in some way to the kochos hatuma, to the forces of impurity, or to to Esav, as we see Yaakov eventually does. That's not the problem, but the problem is you called it meiser. The ode, and more so, lo hayu lecha lehadbiko im aasrenu loch. You should have not stuck it together with the second part of your statement, your commitment, Asranu Loch. Hashem took issue with the fact that Yaakov said, Aser, I'm going to take a tithe, and he meant for a non-Kodesh purpose. And then he connected to Asranu Loch, and I'm going to take a second tithe to give to you, Hashem. There are two problems there. One is the Zera Shimshon says Hashem said Yaakov shouldn't have called it Meiser. And also, which is a term that denotes a tithe for holy purposes, for Kedusha. And second of all, you shouldn't have said the two things together. You should have said separately what you were going to do, but not put the two commitments together. Shelule hata'omim, because if it were not for the cantillation notes for the trup, hayanishma, it would have implied shebein aser ubein aasrenu, whether or not it was the first word about tithing, which is aser, or the second part of aasrenu, I will tithe, yelecha, they go together, they appear to go together to be for Hashem, the Hainu Hashem, which means they're both being used for a holy purpose. So Hashem is saying, Yaakov Avinu, when your use of words, your phrasing here is leaves something to be desired, because the words aser asrenu loch imply that you're going to do all the tithing that you do, the first tithing and the second tithing, Lashem, for Hashem, but that was not Yaakov was saying that wasn't his intention. As Chazal say in the Gemara in Ksubas, shehifrish chomesh. There's an opinion in the Gemara over there in Ksubas that Yaakov Avinu literally meant aser asrenu loch. I'm going to not just give one tithing, I'm going to give 2/10, which of course equals a fifth of all of the things I've acquired to Hashem. And so that's what the Gemara in Ksubas actually understands the psukim. And so Hashem is saying to Yaakov, you're using a very vague and a very misleading language to say what you're claiming you wanted to say. V'yesh kan mokom laz labrios, and there's a place here, there's room here for people, sheyomru, that they will say, shema shekfar nadarta Hashem, that items that you already took a vow to give to Hashem, chazarta l'shochol el Esav. You retracted, you went back on that vow, and you gave some of those items to Esav. So let's pause here for a moment to recap. What the Zera Shimshon has done for us so far is to explain what Yaakov Avinu's actual intention was and how that fits into the words aser asrenu loch, namely that he was going to do two different actions of tithing, two different actions of taking a tenth. The first one would be to take a tenth of the items he acquired in Chutz La'aretz while he was with Lavan, and to designate to give them to the in some way to the impure forces and the angelic forces that are in control outside of Eretz Yisrael. And then the second tithing to take and use in the normal way, the normal understanding of the term, for Hashem, for holy purposes. So that's what Yaakov was all about. and therefore he's not subject to the charge of having separated Meiser for a holy purpose and switched it and given it for a less than holy purpose. That he did not do. However, Hashem still, based on what Yaakov said, Aser Asrenu Loch, was still displeased because Aser Asrenu Loch, A, uses the term of Meiser in reference to produce that is not going to be given to Hashem, and B, by putting the terms together, it could lead people to think that Yaakov Avinu said, "I'm going to give everything la Hashem," and then turned around and changed his mind and did what would be a real chait of taking some of that produce that was supposed to go to Hashem or for a holy purpose and giving it to Esav. So we understand now what Yaakov Avinu's rationale was and why Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Medrash, the Yalkut Shimoni still quotes HaKadosh Baruch Hu as being unhappy about it. Omnom, continuing, however, Yaakov yesh lo teretz al zeh. Yaakov Avinu has an answer to Hashem's question. She'ein kan mokom lalaz klal. And Yaakov can say, there's no legitimate cause here for people to think that I'm doing something wrong at all. Shahadover yadua, because it is a well-known matter. Shelo sheshem meiser eino chal, that the name of meiser cannot take effect. Al dover shelo bo birishuso shel adam, on any kind of items that are not in the possession of a person when that person is attempting to put the Shem Meiser on them. Meaning, in simple words, you have to have produce, let's say, or animals in the case of Meiser of animals, you have to have the items in your possession before you can tie them and actually have the Shem Meiser, the name of Meiser officially take effect on 1/10 of whatever it is that you are tithing. You have to have it in your possession. And now the Zera Shimshon is going on a little bit of a digression to explain an exception to this rule, and then he'll come back to the rule. Ella, but shebidemai hekelu. But the Chachamim were lenient on this rule when it comes to demai. Demai is produce about which we are unsure if the appropriate tithes have been taken. In general, that applied to property back in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara teaches us that would apply, that term demai would be applied to produce of Amei Haaretz, to ignorant people or people who we could not rely on for sure, for certain, that they took the appropriate tithes. So their produce was called demai, and you had to take tithes from it, even though a majority of these people usually were careful about taking the appropriate, doing the appropriate tithing and taking off, separating the appropriate things. Nonetheless, if you bought produce from an Am Haaretz or in a situation where you weren't certain that tithes were taken, you had to take tithes, and that was called demai. So Elisha b'demai hekelu. But regarding demai, which is this uncertain type produce, there they were lenient about this issue of being able to take meiser even when it wasn't in your possession. Kamosha Pasuk Rambam, as the Rambam decides the halacha, and you'll see there in Hilchas Meiser, and he says, Hamaz mines chaveiro, a person who invites his friend, sheyochal etzlo, to come eat with him, and it's talking about on Shabbos. So you invite someone on Friday, on Erev Shabbos, to come eat with you on Shabbos. You say, come for Friday night dinner, or come for Shabbos lunch. V'hu eino ma'amino ala maestros. And the guest that is being invited does not trust his host about taking tithes appropriately. So this person has a little problem. The Rambam's setting up a case where a person, let's call this person Chaim invites Shlomo to come eat with him on Shabbos. And Shlomo says, yes, but his problem is he doesn't totally trust Chaim. He's not 100% sure that Chaim has taken the appropriate maestros, the appropriate tithes from the food that's going to be served on Shabbos. So what should he do? Omer me'erev Shabbos, before Shabbos comes in, right then on Friday, Shlomo, the guest, the prospective guest, should say, Mashani osid lahafri shlemachar, the food or that I'm going to separate off from what I'm given tomorrow, harehu meiser. I'm making it meiser right now, v'chule, etc. Even though it's not in his possession, right? And he's not going to be given the food until Shabbos, but now it's Erev Shabbos. So he's allowed to do that. Why? Mipnei shemuter la'adam lahasnos tanoim elu, because it is permissible for a person to make these kinds of conditions al hademai on uncertain produce, afal pisha eno birashuso, even though it is not presently in his possession. So the Zera Shimshon again went on a bit of a tangent there to say that the rule that he is established, that he is articulating, doesn't apply to demai. Aval, now he continues and circles back to his original point. Aval bevadai, but if you're talking about something that certainly you know the appropriate tithes were not yet taken, Eino masna ella al dover shebarushuso. You cannot make any kind of condition on it unless it's already in your possession, which would not apply to the guy on Shabbos, the guest who hadn't yet, Shabbos hadn't yet come and he wasn't sitting at the meal. Ad kan lashono, until here, is all the quote from that halacha in the Rambam. Ve'im kain, and if so, meaning if we know that the rule is that a person cannot have meiser take effect on something unless it's in his possession. Im kain masha amar Yaakov, if so, what Yaakov said when he took his vow, v'chol asher titen li aser asrenu loch, and all that you will give me, I will take meiser from it for you. Adayin eno klum. That's meaningless. There's no, it doesn't take any effect. He can't, Yaakov couldn't make such a condition on items that he hadn't yet acquired, that weren't yet in his possession, ad sheyafrishenu, until he actually had the items and was going to separate off the meiser. Ulekesheyafrishenu. And when Yaakov did have the property later on, and he did separate off the tithes, Kemoshe Choshev Bidato, he did it according to what he was originally planning, Be'ez Kriyashem Meiser, at the time that he was actually calling the produce Meiser and separating it for real and giving it its name of Meiser, Dahainu Litno LeEsav, which was to give it to Esav. So when Yaakov actually separated animals off to give to Esav, which of course we know the story where he separated off groups of animals and he sent them ahead with his servants to bring them as a gift to Esav, the Zera Shimshon identifies for us now, that was Hafrashas Meiser. That was the moment when he was actually physically separating off a tenth of the items that he had acquired, of the animals that he had acquired in Chutz La'aretz, and he was sending them to go to Esav. Igloi milsa lamafreya. And so he was revealing retroactively shalonis kavein ela lehachnifo, that his whole intention from the beginning was only to flatter Esav, laseis lo chelek yofe, to give him a nice portion of animals, a lot of animals, sheshmo meiser, that had a name of meiser attached to them, but not real meiser, not holy sacred meiser. Aval be'emes lo chal alav klal. But in truth, the actual halachos, the actual kedusha and sanctity of meiser and the laws regarding meiser did not take effect on these animals at all, but it was only something that Yaakov referred to as meiser way back when he took his vow previously, before even completely leaving Eretz Canaan. V'diyuk hakosav hu kach, and the precise way to understand this pasuk is as follows: Mashe etein lecha, Yaakov Avinu was saying to Hashem, that which I will give to you, Hashem, as real meiser, sacred meiser, and I want the name of meiser to be fully applicable to it in its usual holy sacred sense, that those items Achzor likro alav shem meiser, I will come back and return and say, call them meiser b'shas hafrasha, at the time that I separate them. Masha ein kain ba'oso shenasati le'esav, which is not the case regarding the animals that I separated for Esav. Those animals Yaakov only referred to in the very beginning when he took his vow, before he even had them in his possession. Those things he called meiser, but he didn't call them meiser at the crunch time when it would count, when he actually separated them for Esav. Vizehu, and this is another understanding of aser asrenu loch, the words aser asrenu loch, meaning aser, I'm going to take tithes, I'm going to take a tithe, asrenu loch, and I'm going to repeat that it's meiser later on, and that's what goes to Hashem. So the Zera Shimshon has given us two explanations of the phrase aser asrenu loch. The first one is that Yaakov was saying from the beginning that he was going to take meiser twice, once for the kochos hatuma, once for the powers of impurity, and a second time for Hashem, a tenth for each of those purposes. And the first one would be whole, would be secular, and the second one would be kodesh, would be sacred. In addition to that, that same phrase, aser asrenu loch, the Zera Shimshon explains to us, is a reference to the fact that Yaakov was answering Hashem's concern. He was responding to Hashem's concern and saying, Hashem, aser asrenu loch, that which I'm going to give meiser to you, I'm going to refer to as meiser twice. Once right now, I'm going to call it meiser, then I'm going to tithe it to you. And then again, once I actually have it and I'm doing the hafrasha, I'm separating it off to use for a holy purpose, I'm going to call it meiser again. And that second time is the time that counts. That's only when I have the items that I can actually call it meiser and have it take effect and have it be an official tithing. However, when it comes to what I'm separating off to give to Esav, I'm referring to it as meiser, and I'm doing that intentionally so that Esav will feel honored and the kochos hatuma will feel, oh, they'll be appeased that they're also getting meiser in quotation marks, but it's not really meiser because I'm not going to go back and refer to it as meiser at the time of the hafrasha, which is the only time, once it's in my possession, that I can officially make it meiser. And that Yaakov Avinu says I never had any intention of doing, and he actually did not do. So the Zera Shimshon has once again taken some psukim and explained them on a much deeper level than certainly what would meet the eye or would meet our understanding in a casual way. Yasher koach to everyone for joining us in the learning this week, and we look forward, God willing, to learning the Zera Shimshon again on next week's parsha.